to control your behavior. And often the passion, the animation, as I would, begin to have these, I would push back against things that I didn't really like or didn't want to have happen to me. People misinterpreted my animation and passion for rage, and I always struggle with that because in my mind I'm thinking, you haven't seen rage yet. Wait till I throw the TV through the window. And I've done things like that in my life. And that's rage, right? And I'm nowhere near that yet. But I could tell that it was scary to some people. And I couldn't change that. Because that was really the only coping mechanism that I had at the time. I didn't know how to be, I didn't know how to negotiate. I'd get so anxious and filled with anxiety that I would immediately, it was a trauma response, folks. That's what was happening. And the moment that trauma response happened, essentially I shut off the thinking adult in my head and went back to what I know works for me as a child. I pick up the bat. So I'm sharing all this with you because I need you all to understand that I have seen lots and lots of counselors and psychiatrists and psychologists over my lifetime. And in doing that, I've often been given some, odd diagnoses. I've had, probably more harm than any good from the interactions that I've had with the vast majority of trained professionals who were sent my way to help and support me. So I share all that because it's important for you to understand that I couldn't figure out what the hell was wrong with me. And because I had been essentially told that I'm a bad person, that I was the black sheep of the family, that I was going to amount to nothing. And then I had this, coming from family, and then I had, those folks who were trying to help and support me saying essentially the same things, and were masking it in some clinical terminology. But basically, I was walking away from them feeling like, wow, I'm really broken, I'm unrepairable, and that almost became a self-fulfilling, prophecy, right? If you think I'm this bad, let me show you. What's the point in doing anything right if I never get credit for that, and all you ever see in me is this bad, broken, drag of society? So I carried that for a long time, and it showed all the time. It showed in broken relationships. It showed in my inability to hold a job. It showed in the fact that I was just in deep poverty. It manifested itself over and over. And the only constant in all of that was that even when I couldn't and probably shouldn't have had animals because I couldn't care for them in the way that that they should be cared for, they were still in my life. And if they were the only things at times that brought me any comfort and any joy, and they were also the only things that allowed me to step outside of myself and care and nurture another living being. And trust me when I tell you, I didn't know how to do that because that never happened to me. Nobody nurtured me. Nobody nurtured me or my sister. We just, we were basically considered outcasts in our own family. And I'll tell you why as we get a little further on. But bottom line is this. I began to, really begin to wonder why I was enduring what seemed to be just one horrific hardship after another, after another in my life. And I couldn't break free from all of these accumulative hardships and challenges. Everything from leaving school in the 7th grade and never attending high school was a challenge that I created because I ran away and began skipping school. But imagine what I lost in the 4 years that most people go to high school. By the time I was 18, my mother, who had been our caretaker, suffered a cerebral aneurysm, and it left her completely disabled, dependent on me to provide care, and in unbelievable poverty. I mean, we were living on her Social Security check, which was about $800 a month, and I had a job that paid minimum wage. Back then, it might have been $4 an hour. It wasn't much. It's not much today either, but back then it was even less. And so everything about my life, it was just like, it was almost like, I was down, and then somebody came along and kicked me, and for good measure, somebody behind that person decided to give me a kick too. And this is not a story about me being a victim and me being helpless. It is my story about the difficulty of trying to move through your life with unchecked mental health and substance use challenges, and nobody to help provide you the guidance and support, and most importantly, love and hope that help most of us, move through our lives. So, by the time I was in my 30s, and this is when I had my first, my real thoughts about suicide. It was because I had, by now, had children, was still, horribly impoverished, couldn't find a pathway out of poverty, and now I had the burden of trying to care for my children as well. And the difficulty of doing that, and trying day after day with really no hope of anything better, was so demoralizing that I began to have suicidal thoughts, and I had a lot of them. And that stress, that trauma, those challenges that of trying to live my life, just trying to live it, just trying to make it, from one day to the next, from one paycheck to the next, and knowing that this is it, it's not going to get any better than this, I could barely handle that. And so as I had these suicidal ideations, as they're called, even my children, I used to think, God, they'd be so much better off if I was just gone, and they were able to get the kind of support and help that they really need, but they're never going to get because I'm in their lives, and I've been essentially blocked from those services and support. So if I was gone, they might stand a better chance than I did making something out of their lives. And so I was ready. And I knew I was going to do it. I had a plan, and I had the wherewithal. And the only reason I didn't is because whenever I looked at my dogs, the thought of leaving them in somebody else's hands, and I'm sorry that this sounds so crazy because I was willing to do this with my children, but I was unwilling to do it with my dogs and my cats. But the thought of leaving my dogs and having them end up in a shelter or, worse, it was so traumatizing to me that I couldn't do it. And so they gave me a purpose. My dogs gave me a purpose when nothing else in my life would. And those dogs back then certainly saved my life, and they are the reason that I'm here with you today. Now, throughout the rest of my life and up to present day today, I have worked on a lot of my behavioral health challenges and issues. I'm in long-term recovery from a substance use disorder and an opioid use disorder. I am on several different medications. I have severe PTSD, severe ADHD, bipolar disorder, and the challenges that I've faced over the last 20 or 30 years, I'm 60 years old today, I have slowly been working through using the medications appropriately, stepping away from illegal substance misuse. And throughout it all, animals have been present in my life. And in the last 5 years, the last 6 years, I did a medically supervised withdrawal from the medication-assisted treatment program. I'd spent about 16 years on methadone to treat a heroin addiction. And after I came off those medications, I had a resurgence of mental health challenges. And this was before I had gotten my mental health diagnoses and began my medication treatment. So I came off the methadone, and I was very ill. And I was mentally ill for a couple of years, but I kept thinking that this was called post-acute withdrawal. And it's really common for people who have an opioid use disorder. And so I just rode with it for a couple of years, and it really put a strain on my job and my relationships with my family, but I made it through. And in the third year, I became convinced that this was something more than just post-acute withdrawal as a result of my opioid use disorder. And the reason that I became so aware of that is because many of the challenges and issues that I had used heroin to stop had returned, and they had returned with a vengeance. And this time, I was at a level in my knowledge and my recovery to recognize that if I didn't do something about these challenges, these new mental health issues, it was very likely that I would relapse, and most likely I would end up dead as a result. Now, I'm telling you that because how I knew that I was moving into these depressing, dangerous times for me was because one of my dogs, Kumi, is what I would call an empath. And Kumi understands just intuitively. She can feel when my mood shifts. And when that happens, she will climb up on me. She will press her face really tight against mine. And basically what she's saying is, I love you, I know you're struggling, and I'm here for you. And it isn't just one time that she's done that. She does that every time. If my voice raises while I'm giving you this podcast discussion right now, I promise you she'd be right here with me. And she would be looking at me like, are you okay? So about a year ago, right before I started the medications for my mental health issues, I was really depressed, and I was seriously considering suicide. And again, I had the means, I had a plan, I knew how to do it, and the ultimate goal for me was to make this stop. I needed to turn it off. I couldn't do it anymore. And every time those feelings became overwhelming, Kumi would show up, crawl all over me, and do the same thing. I love you, I'm here for you. And I had the same thought patterns. I am